I'm an anxious person by nature. I worry about the future, I worry about my place in the universe, I worry about how others are feeling, I worry about screwing things up, and that's just the stuff that I'm comfortable sharing with you. Most of all, I think I fear a loss of control. So if that's the case, then why on earth is my favorite game series Fallout? The game that brings you a heaping helping of existential dread, fear of nuclear war, and the bleak and unforgiving post-apocalyptic wasteland that comes after, and, well, images like this. I guess I'm not being totally fair. Blood and guts aren't the only things these games have to offer. There's the quaint mid-century retrofuturism, the cheeky sense of humor, the eerie soundtrack dissonance of old-timey music against harsh, nasty environments, and perhaps most importantly for a game, the exploration. These games just beg you to explore every inch of them. The world building and set dressing are so compelling that half the time I spend playing, I just want to root around in every building, read every journal entry, and talk to every NPC. I cannot wait for Season 2 of the series, guys. I am not well. Because of my love of all things Fallout, and perhaps to show myself that even in a world where I'm forced to confront my own lack of control, something beautiful can exist. I decided to make something that could have come from the Fallout wasteland itself. Here's the idea. I wanted something unique that looked like it might have been assembled from found materials by a travel-weary wastelander who just wanted to sit down with a friend and relax. Why not a board game? And what's the most simple board game that even the lowliest ghoul could play? Checkers. Let's get started. First, let's make the checkers themselves. What would any self-respecting wastelander use as checkers? Nuka-Cola bottle caps, of course. All I need to do is laser engrave some blank caps, and then paint the engraved area with contrasting enamel paint. To make that painting more easy, I'm going to turn to that blessed invention, masking tape. Essentially, I'll cover each bottle cap in masking tape. The laser will burn away both the tape and the paint on the bottle cap, but leave a stencil of masking tape behind that will make it much easier to paint the tiny Nuka-Cola logo with accuracy. This right here is perhaps the greatest idea I've ever had, and will probably be the best decision I've ever made about how to spend my precious time on this earth. But, just in case I don't want to paint each bottle cap, let's see real quick how it looks when I just engrave it. Huh. Moving on. First, I'm going to 3D model a chunk of rebar in Blender to act as a border piece of the game board. I started with a handy screw modeling plugin, but then I futzed around with the parameters until I had something resembling rebar and removed the more screwy bits. From there, I added those rectangular ribs that run down the sides of rebar and booleaned both shapes together. Any rebar you find out in the wasteland, of course, is bound to be pretty beat up, so I used the pose tool to give the rebar a few gnarly bends. Finally, I booleaned away a rectangular slot on the side, just big enough for the game board itself to slide into. Next, another border piece will be fashioned from a discarded license plate. So a logical first step is to design a Fallout-appropriate license plate in Photoshop. I decided to go with something that might be at home in Fallout 4, which takes place around Boston. In the Fallout world, Boston is part of what's referred to as the New England Commonwealth. So with that in mind, I started with the template of an old Massachusetts license plate. I swapped out Massachusetts for New England, and then decided on a way too clever vanity plate. Taking that design into Blender, I made a basic license plate shape and then subdivided it until I had vertices coming out of my ears. In what was probably, in hindsight, one of the dumbest ways to do this, I aligned dozens of vertices to the text of the license plate until every character was vaguely outlined. Then I selected every face that covered something green and extruded everything off the surface a few millimeters. It was after all this that I realized license plates are kind of tall in comparison to the couple inches that this checkerboard was supposed to be, and that most of the text I had just painstakingly outlined would need to be cut off to make it fit. So, I took my model and gave it a mean 90-degree bend, aligned it to the rest of the board, and I cropped off everything that didn't fit. Next. I'm not sure what to call this piece, but my thought is that it was some sort of decorative detail inside a vault that the minds at Vault-Tec decided to slap their logo on. I roughed out the basic shape and fit it to the board, and then hit an SVG of the logo with a sexy solidify modifier. Messed around with it so it was all in a line, and boom. For the final edge, I wanted to make something that looked like riveted scrap metal. I modeled a piece that fit snugly to the board, and then I subdivided the edges. Then I joined those new vertices haphazardly until I was left with a series of irregular faces. One by one, I inset those faces before nudging them all out a touch to create a bevel. Finally, I copied those faces and instanced a little sphere at every vertex, and gradually subdivided the edges to create more vertices, and therefore more spheres until I had enough rivets to look appropriate. Finally, it was just a matter of deleting those extra faces and bullioning the rivets to the original shape. At long last, it's time to start 3D printing. Now, with all of those 3D printed, it's time for the board itself. I want the main board to look like it was created from a Nuka-Cola crate. Kind of like those old Coca-Cola crates, but in my headcanon it was more cube-shaped because that made it hold the flavor better. Definitely not just because I needed a square shape, that's for sure. First, we need to design the checkerboard pattern itself, which I want to look fairly improvised, like whoever made this either scratched or burned the squares into the crate. I start by making an 8x8 grid in Illustrator and scrolling a gnarly, scratchy shape to roughly fill every other square. I massaged the individual shapes to give things a little more randomness, and then I had an idea of how the finished board might look. I start by cutting out a stencil of the Nuka-Cola logo on some peel and stick vinyl, before putting that on a transfer sheet and sticking it onto a 12x12 inch piece of basswood, which I painted red off camera. With the stencil in place, I got a nice toothy brush and some white paint and unevenly and thinly dabbed it through the stencil. I was going for that faded antique look that an artifact like this might have, what with the passage of time and the whole being abandoned in a radioactive dump after nuclear holocaust and all that. With the paint dry, it's time to peel away the vinyl to reveal something that, if I'm being honest, could probably go on a wall as a pretty sick piece of art of its own. Now, we can finally engrave. The laser left these sooty, tarry scorch marks around the engravings, which is probably a combination of the settings I used and the fact that I engraved on top of acrylic paint. But since it feels right for the setting, I'm actually going to call that a happy accident. Time to paint the border pieces. After gluing and puttying the outside pieces together, since I had to print them in pieces because none of my printers can accommodate a 12-inch print, I made some primer using black paint, Mod Podge, and some movie magic. All 4 edge pieces get a liberal coating of this primer to give the future coats something to adhere to. Next, I start adding a metallic sheen to things with a base coat of black and silver, dry brushed over the entire surface. Then, to bring in some warm earthy tones, I mix my base coat with some brown and gold, and dry brush each object with that. From there, I can add highlights by dry brushing pure silver on any edges, bumps, or raised surfaces. Basically anywhere that would naturally get rubbed raw, kind of like you see when there's a metal sculpture in a public place and people keep touching it. After that, I give everything a few dark washes, allowing the grime to seep into the cracks and crevices and wiping away the excess. Now that everything looks like metal, I can paint the Vault-Tec piece and the license plate with their top coats. The Vault-Tec thing gets some good old Vault Boy blue and yellow. I was careful not to overcoat this thing, but I also didn't weather it more after applying top colors. I figured that this thing wouldn't have been out exposed in the wasteland, but would more likely have been within a vault for the 200 years since the bombs fell, getting passed down from overseer to overseer, never seeing a fresh coat of paint, but not rusting away to oblivion in a dilapidated jet den. For the license plate, I went with white and green like the old Massachusetts plates, leaving areas for the metallic paint to poke through where the paint would have worn away. I liked the green I used, but this white you're seeing ended up looking a little too much like whiteout, so off camera I went back over it with the enamel paint that I had on hand for the bottle caps to give it a little more gloss. Now, what good is a license plate without registration stickers? I printed out some stickers to represent a Fallout relevant date for the registration date. If you know your Fallout lore, sound off in the comments about what that date represents to get some nerd street cred. Environmental storytelling, baby! Now, everything needs a little bit of rust. I busted out the airbrush, and on each piece besides the Vault-Tec logo, I added some, well, rusty colors, starting with the darker, grimier corrosion, and working my way up to that classic iron oxide looking rusty color. For the bottle caps, there's no way these things would stay pristine in the wasteland for 200 years, so to give them some weathering, I had to resort to some pretty specialized techniques. With each of these caps dented and scratched, I now have a full set of checkers that can receive the same airbrush rust treatment. Finally, we bust out the E6000 and glue each piece of the border to the rim of the board, firmly solidifying all of these disparate metal parts into one whole, a brotherhood of steel, if you will. With the final touches completed, we're finally ready to open the vault and gaze upon the beauty that can still exist even in a bleak and dreary world. Hey everybody, thank you so much for watching. This is a lot of fun to make, and so if you made it this far, I hope it was very fun to watch. If you made it this far and you didn't like it, then congrats on liking torture. If you'd like to see more of these in the future, please don't hesitate to like this video, comment, tell me more about what you would like to see me make, and just absolutely pummel that subscribe button. If you've come here from my other channel, Questions, then welcome. I'm doing something a little different here. I want to do a channel where I'm making things. So if you're happy to see that, then you might want to join the ride over here as well. Once again, thanks a ton. Love ya. Bye.